Popular social media superstar, the renowned content creator, the serial risk taker, and undefeated fighter, introducing the problem child, Jake Paul!
Julio, Cesar, Chavez Jr.
That's right. It's all good. That ain't gonna do anything. You're doing really good. All right.
Before the fight was the early rounds could be decisive, and it is quite clear.
Leyenda continúa. Julio Cesar Chavez Julio.
Popular social media superstar, the renowned content creator, the serial risk taker and undefeated fighter. Introducing the problem child J. Paulo Cesar Chavez Jr., music, applause, really good. Before the fight was the early rounds could be decisive, and it is quite clear. Applause, yes. Nothing was left in the gym. Overall, Jake, how'd you feel in there? I just felt flat, man. Not my best performance. I guess that happens in the sport, you know. You got to peak right at the right moment. You only get one night, one chance, and I messed that up, I guess. But, didn't think I'd ever have to make one of these videos, but it happens. I guess this is still the best job in the world. Thank you all for the support. This was an amazing event. And I'll be back. No worries, 'cause I feel Jake. I know there was a lot of talk about him without power. You took his shots pretty well and you knocked. Yeah. No, his power wasn't that crazy. He just had good speed, good combinations, but Anderson and Tyron hit really hard, so I was used to that. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Boxing, man. You got to take it on the chin. But it was good. Some good moments in there. I just really couldn't get my game plan working. But hey, man, this is what the sport's all about. You win some in glorious fashion and you lose some. And like I said out there, judge me about my losses 'cause I'll be back. You know, I think he was just really well prepared. And I think it was more so with the showdown between Jake Paul and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. just days away. DAZN Boxing released an exclusive of the duo with direct interviews from special guests raising expectations for their choice. For Jake Paul, Sarukian was completely fascinated by the 28-year-old boxer. Jake is a legend because to start boxing so late and show good boxing is not easy, he said. Jake Paul's desire to prove everyone wrong also impressed the UFC fighter. However, what surprised him the most was his agility and mobility. Despite his size, I'm surprised how big he is. He's so big and hits so hard, he said, claiming that he moves like a real boxer. He believes that Paul is ready for the weekend and will come out victorious. Looking at the statistics, it is hard to believe that anyone would bet on Jake Paul to beat Chavez. That said, considering the Mexican fighter performance and the development of his recent fights, one could certainly make an argument in favor of the YouTuber-turned-boxer. Meanwhile, Arman Tsarukyan is not the only icon who favors Paul in the June 28 showdown. Recently, a 6th Division World Boxing Champion, another combat sports icon, shared a surprising prediction that shocked everyone. Golden Boy Promotions director Oscar de la Hoya will be keeping a close eye on the Paul vs. Chavez Jr. fight. After all, two of his fighters, Gilberto Ramirez and Floyd Schofield, will be competing on the undercard, and the event is also co-promoted by GB Promotions. So, a few days ago, the 52-year-old boxer decided to liven up the fight. In true Golden Boy style, De La Hoya shared his prediction for the entire card. It's fight week. Jake Paul vs. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. I'm going to give you my predictions. Golden Boy style baby, he said, taking off his robe while making all his predictions in his underwear. As expected for the undercard, Raul Curiel, Floyd Schofield, and Zordo Ramirez were his favorites. However, things changed when it came to predicting the main event. After a back-and-forth battle, Jake Paul takes the victory by split decision in the 12th round, predicted De La Hoya, declaring Jake Paul as the favorite. The Jake Paul boxing experiment continues rolling on Saturday when the social media star turned fighter faces former middleweight champion Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. The fight with Chavez marks Paul's second consecutive bout against a former world champion following his November win over 58-year-old Mike Tyson. While Chavez is not 58 years old, he is merely 39, he is more than a decade removed from his time as a relevant top-tier boxer. Even at his peak, Chavez was never close to living up to the legacy of his father's incredible career and was often bogged down in controversy and plagued by self-inflicted issues. No, I don't think he's good. I think he tries. He trains hard, but he's not a good fighter. Chavez Jr. said at the final press conference, he's definitely not a good boxer. If he were a good boxer, then everyone else on this stage would be a legend. I don't think he's a good boxer, and everybody knows that. In a way, this makes Chavez the perfect Paul opponent. Paul has feasted on aged fighters well past their glory days while continuing to do big business. After defeating fellow influencer Anisan Jib to start his pro career, Paul knocked out retired basketball player Nate Robinson. That was followed up with a string of fights with former UFC fighters such as Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley twice, and Anderson Silva. After losing a narrow split decision to Tommy Fury, Paul returned to the former UFC fighter. Well, with a win over Nate Diaz, Paul tried a few fights with real boxers, Andre August and Ryan Borland, stopping both club fighters in the first round. Those fights were fair for most pro fighters with less than 10 career fights, but the lack of name value led to a lack of public interest and drove Paul right back to fighting a former UFC fighter in Mike Perry. Paul battered the bare-knuckle fighter to score the 7th stoppage victory of his career before moving on to Tyson and a massive box office. Though the fight was disappointingly dull with Paul safely outboxing Tyson and largely appearing as though he didn't want to hurt the legend. And that brings us to Paul versus Chavez. Chavez has name value. He has boxing experience and a championship in his past. He also fits the usual criteria of Paul opponents as well past his prime and undersized for a cruiserweight fight. He's a great fighter. I like big names, legendary names, and he's on my path to a world championship, Paul said at the final press conference. This is a tough test, a very tough test, but I'm here to challenge myself and do big things in this sport and then make a title run after I beat him on Saturday. To his credit, Paul was close to signing a deal for a fight with Saul Canelo Alvarez before it became clear Alvarez had used him for leverage before signing a 3-fight deal with Riyadh Season. And now we're back to the standard Paul fight, though one that arguably presents slightly more risk than former UFC fighters since Chavez, no matter how faded, has spent most of his life training to compete in the boxing ring. And that's all for now. For the very best updates on news, moments, events, and actions in the world of boxing, stay connected with us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. And don't forget to turn on notifications to get notified when we drop quality contents like this. Until next time, peace.